at the dispersion, people left, and the people went out from Babel, there's going to be an inherent culture loss. Okay? Think of it like when you take the family camping. Okay? You pack up the car and you pack up some things and you pack up some extra clothes stuff and you go camping for a couple days or a week or whatever. And, it's roughing it, and we kind of like that. We like a little bit of the culture loss sometimes. No TV, maybe even no cell phone service. Isn't that nice? But you're dealing with culture loss. Now, if you're in Babel and you've just lost a whole lot of the workforce and yet you still have some ambitious plans, how hard is it to go out and subjugate and enslave these people and bring them back and force them to labor with you? Wouldn't be hard at all, because they still have all of this technology and all these buildings and probably tools and everything else around there. So you're going to see possibly some interactions, maybe some violence between them. So if you don't want to be a part of that, you've got to escape even farther. So these people now who have to push out even farther for this dispersion are getting farther away from the cultural center. They're going to have a more aboriginal or primitive culture. Okay? Try to imagine you've just taken your family on a camping trip, and some bad guys came into your campsite and held you up and took all of your food and all of your clothes in your car and left you stranded in the wilderness with just the clothes on your back. All of a sudden, the camping trip isn't as much fun, is it? No, now it's survival. Now you're doing what you can to survive. You might have to spend the night in a cave. Okay? Does it mean that you're any less intelligent than you were the day before you left for your trip? No, it just means that now you've had all of your culture and your technology stripped from you. And that's very likely what happened to these ancient caveman-type people that we're going to be exploring a little bit farther on. Okay? But what about, for instance, these cavemen? What about Java Man? He was discovered in 1891. And I'm going to go through some of these supposed ancestors of mankind. What about Java Man? He was found to be a human leg bone and a monkey skull cap. After they looked it over, of course, they put him out and they say, oh, we found evidence of man's ancestors. And then when actual anthropologists look at it, they say, yeah, this is human, but this is not human. And so they disqualify it, eventually, after they get all the publicity that they want out of it. Homo erectus, 1894, found later to be a completely modern human. Neanderthal man, 1856. Very old skeleton suffering from arthritis and rickets. He wasn't on the way up, he was on the way down. And he's essentially identical to a male, European male of today's age. In fact, it said that if you were to take Neanderthal man and dress him in today's clothes, put him out on the streets, you wouldn't even bat an eye. You wouldn't notice him. Piltdown man, 1912, found to be a hoax after studying for 40 years. The guy who put together a hoax, Piltdown man, he found some teeth and a jawbone of another animal. He filed it down, stained it to make it look old, and he presented it, and they locked it away in a vault. And they only showed replicas of it for years. And when a dentist finally examined it, he said, this is a fraud. But it stood for 40 years. Several doctoral theses were written on it, but it served its purpose. It got the lie out for 40 years. Nebraska man, 1922. The only evidence found was one tooth. And later it was found that tooth came from an extinct pig. And that was used as the main evidence at the Scopes monkey trial in 1925. And Lucy, I was talking with somebody today about Lucy. Australopithecus atherensis, 1973. It's basically shown now that Lucy was simply a large extinct chimp. But you heard a lot about Lucy when she was first discovered. What about Cro-Magnon man, 1868? Do you know that Cro-Magnon man drew cave paintings? In France, they have them. They can be accessed by certain people. You have to get all kinds of permits. But they're there. Cro-Magnon man is also depicted as clean-shaven, wearing shoes, pants, coats, and even hats. No shaky-haired, animal skin-covered savages here. Instead, we have sewn clothes, tailored with collars and sleeves, pants with legs, even bracelets and necklaces. In fact, real jewelry begins at this time. Numerous bone needles have been found, as well as obsidian razors in the caves where Cro-Magnon man lived. Want to see a picture of Cro-Magnon man's woman? That's how he drew his women. Cro-Magnon man. Doesn't look very primitive to me. One of the few upper Paleolithic drawings of a human being. Notice the relatively modern-looking tailored clothing with sewn arms and legs, also shoes and a hat. Cro-Magnon men are sometimes depicted as clean-shaven and even playing musical instruments. These are civilized people who became refugees in a new land with no infrastructure, like the campers who had their campsite raided. Evidence from archeology. You recognize the Great Pyramids there, right? The Great Pyramids, especially the largest one in the middle, of Cheops, precisely aligned to the cardinal points. It lines up perfectly with north-south and east-west. It has 13 square acres at the base, and the variance in those 13 acres is less than 1/8 of an inch. Do you know of any contractor in the world today, you could say, hey, I've got a 13-acre plot. I want you to plow it and level it and pave me a 13-acre parking lot, perfectly flat, less than 1/8 of an inch variance. And I'll give you, offer him $20 million. He'll turn you down. He can't do it. We don't have the technology to even lay the foundation for the Great Pyramid today. And the oldest pyramids in Egypt are the most sophisticated and advanced. The later ones got shoddier and shoddier and shoddier as the technology was getting lost more and more. How about Chichen Itza? I had a tour guide once say, no, this is not pronounced chicken pizza. Chichen Itza in Mexico, or Machu Picchu. Or this place, Palenque, Mexico. From his book, Unlocking the Mysteries of Creation, by Dennis Peterson, he says this. When I was there on a sweltering April day, the temperature was about 100 degrees and the humidity was 100%. But inside this immense 6-story high structure, the rooms were air-conditioned. Carefully engineered corridors channeled cool air through the massive stone passageways, assuring ideal temperatures year-round. This ancient system has been working perfectly for 1,000 years, even with no one there to maintain it. The ancients could build a building in the middle of this Central American humid desert, and it would still be cool. Didn't need compressors on the roof and all kinds of cooling coils. It was working by itself. People could inhabit the place. This city is called Sacsayhuaman. It is near Lima, Peru. The site was pilfered until 1934, and only 10% of it remains, but still quite impressive for as much as is there. The stones are not indigenous to that site. The closest location is a mountain 20 miles away. These stones were quarried and hauled somehow 20 miles to this site and established. And remember, what you see here is a fraction of what was originally there. The stones are fitted together, some with 10, 12, and even 36 sides. No mortar or cement was used, and yet it's still standing, even though they've had earthquakes in that area. And the joints are so fine, there's no cracks in them at all. See this group of people here standing in front of this rock? This stone right here is estimated to weigh 100 tons. And there it sits, and other stones piled around it. Now, there's another stone at this site that was quarried, but not actually on the site. And in his book, Secrets of the Lost Races, Rene Norbergen says this about this particular block. He says, what is truly impossible about the block is that it is the size of a 5-story house and weighs an estimated 20,000 tons. We have no combination of machinery today that could dislodge such a weight, let alone move it any distance. The fact that the builders of Sacsayhuaman could and did move this block shows their mastery of a technology which we as yet have not attained. Now, just for fun, I went looking to see if I could find what is the world's biggest crane that we have, the world's biggest mobile crane, because you have to get it on site, right, to do this work. And what I found was this. It's owned by Mamouet, which is probably not how you pronounce it. This mobile crane has a total maximum lift capacity of only 1,600 tons. So that's not even reaching the 20,000 ton mark. So this largest crane couldn't do it, and yet it's the largest one. And when we say mobile, that doesn't mean that you can just drive it right up and park it and start moving things. It has to be disassembled and rebuilt on site. Look at those pads for those feet. The thing is enormous. And it could not lift this block. And yet the ancient man was able to move it. Tiahuanaco in Bolivia. It's near La Paz. The site is at 13,300 feet elevation. This is a picture of Puerta del Sol, the gateway to the sun. And the atmospheric pressure at Tiahuanaco is only 8 pounds per square inch. Because it's so high, non-acclimated persons experience nausea when they visit there. You have to take anti-nausea medication before you go there. Seeds will not even sprout, so crops cannot be grown locally. Produce has to be brought in. And yet there's all this fascinating evidence about the complexity of Tiahuanaco, the way it was laid out, how it aligns to astronomical observations. And as they were started looking at Tiahuanaco, the site, at the bricks, they dislodged some bricks, and they found something very intriguing inside of them. These metal staples, which I'm going to back up just a little bit so you can look at that a little bit more. Looks like, I call it a staple for want of a better term, that these bricks were basically set in place. They had an indentation chisel between the two bricks, and then molten metal had to be smelted on site, poured in there so it could harden to hold these bricks together so they wouldn't dislodge. And that's how they avoided having to use mortar. Now, there's a lot of similarities between what we find in Egypt and in the Americas. And I'm going to go through a little list of these things. Both have huge pyramids aligned to the cardinal points. Both have temples with megalithic stones, megalithic meaning very large. Both show extremely fine joints of less than 1/50th of an inch. You can't put a playing card or a sewing pin between the cracks. Both Egypt and the Americas used royal headdresses of similar style. Both employed a unique style of constructing using L-shaped corners. Both use a similar style of metal clamps to hold the huge stones in place. As they discovered these, they discovered similar things in Egypt too. A little different pattern, but the same basic idea. And both cultures use the process of mummification to preserve and honor their dead. So you have Egypt on one continent and the Americas on another, and yet they're both exhibiting very similar traits in a lot of different aspects of their cultures. In 1996, NBC broadcast a controversial one-hour special called The Mysterious Origins of Man. In this program, many alternative views of man's origins were presented, revealing that there are still many unanswered questions. They didn't try to answer the questions. In fact, the documentary, it was hosted by Charlton Heston. They just put out there to say, well, isn't this an interesting, anomalous fact that doesn't seem to fit the standard paradigm? They weren't trying to make a case for Genesis or the Bible. But the reaction of the scientific community was extreme and continues to this day. There's still blogs being posted every once in a while about this. And it was just designed to say, hey, you know, there's some people who put some information together, did some research, and they found some things that, it just doesn't seem to fit your standard, you know, you to goo by way of the zoo evolutionary paradigm. It was created by NBC's Emmy Award-winning Mystery of the Sphinx. So just for fun, I pulled a few of those quotes. And here's what some people said. Now remember, they're not trying to promote Genesis. They're just saying, there are some things that don't fit history the way we've been taught. Most of the ideas presented were so ludicrous as to not even warrant a rebuttal by any honest investigator. I think you should apologize publicly for this show. It was appalling. Frankly, you're either morons or liars. The non-scientific public watching this drivel may be inclined to actually believe it and to vote for politicians who also believe it. It's all a bunch of hooey. My recommendation is to stay away. See, they weren't trying to promote Genesis. They weren't saying, oh, look, see, this shows that the Bible is true. No, they were just saying, hey, we got a few questions here we'd like to see. Does anybody out there have any answers? Instead of answering, instead of coming back with some scientific proof to substantiate, what do they come back with? Slime. I recommend people write NBC and protest the presentation of this show as a documentary. Thanks largely to the efforts of people like yourself, the American public is generally not capable of evaluating the arguments and evidence you present. Any person who would trot out the old canard about evolution is still a theory, not a fact, cannot be a serious producer. You people should be ashamed of yourselves. The American public will soon be reduced to a gaggle of conspiracy theorists that will not trust a single thing they're told. Well, we already have that problem with our politicians anyway, but you should be banned from the airwaves, this other person says. So anyway, it's available online. If you typed in The Mysterious Origins of Man, you can find out where it's at. I'm not sure. I mean, I have a copy. I'm not sure where I got it from. The people who did the work behind it, Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson, have a couple of books out, though, so I'll mention those. One is called Forbidden Archeology, and another one's called The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson again. That's another one. And also another book that I found interesting to me was Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. He's a British researcher. Again, these aren't from a biblical perspective, but they've found all this evidence, and they say, this doesn't fit the paradigm. And yet, so the evidence is just shelved. They just put it away because they say, you know, we don't want to have to account for that. We don't want to have to answer. We don't want to change our understanding of history. We want to believe that we have evolved and become more sophisticated as time goes on. We don't want anything to mess that up. So the strong parallel suggests that both cultures in Egypt and the Americas were influenced by a common technology thousands of years before Columbus. On 2 continents. Could ancient man have achieved transoceanic travel? Remember we talked about Peleg and the survey thing before? If you don't recognize this, that's okay. This is a copy of the Piri Reis map. Piri Reis was a Turkish admiral. It was drawn on gazelle skin in 1513. It was discovered in Constantinople in 1929 in an obscure library. Admiral Reis is stated that this map was actually copied from older source maps dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Okay, so what about this map? Well, here's the controversy. The Piri Reis map shows the western coast of Africa, eastern coast of South America, and the northern coast of Antarctica. The northern coastline of Antarctica is perfectly detailed. The most puzzling, however, is not so much how Piri Reis managed to draw such an accurate map of the Antarctic region 300 years before it was discovered, but that the map shows the coastline under the ice. In other words, when the original source map was drawn, Antarctica, that coastline was not covered by ice yet. Yeah. In 1953, a Turkish naval officer sent the Piri Reis map to the U.S. Navy Hydrographic Bureau. To evaluate it, M.I. Walters, chief engineer of the Bureau, called for help to Arlington Mallory, an authority on ancient maps who had previously worked with him. After a long study, Mallory discovered the projection method used. And this gets into a whole different field of cartography, which we won't go into. But to check out the accuracy of the map, he made a grid and transferred the Piri Reis map onto a globe. The map was totally accurate. He stated that the only way to draw a map of such accuracy was by aerial surveying, but who, 6,000 years ago, could have used airplanes to map the Earth? Who indeed? The Hydrographic Office couldn't believe what they saw. They were even able to correct some errors in present-day maps. The precision on determining the longitudinal coordinates, on the other hand, shows that to draw the map, it was necessary to use spheroid trigonometry, a process supposedly not known until the middle of the 18th century. Hapgood proved that the Piri Reis map is plotted out in plane geometry, containing latitudes and longitudes at right angles in a traditional grid. Yet it is obviously copied from an earlier map that was projected using spherical trigonometry. Not only did the early map makers know that the Earth was round, but they had knowledge of its true circumference to within 50 miles. Here is a letter, abstract of a letter, dated 6 July 1960, to Professor Hapgood. Dear Professor Hapgood, your request of evaluation of certain unusual features of the Piri Reis map of 1513 by this organization has been reviewed. The claim that the lower part of the map portrays the Princess Martha coast of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, and the Palmer Peninsula is reasonable. We find that this is the most logical and in all probability the correct interpretation of the map. The geographical details shown in the lower part of the map agrees very remarkably with the results of the seismic profile made across the top of the ice cap by the Swedish-British Antarctic expedition of 1949. This indicates the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap. The ice cap in this region is now about a mile thick. We have no idea how the data on this map can be reconciled with the supposed state of geographical knowledge in 1513. Signed by Harold Z. Ohlmeyer, Lieutenant Colonel, USAF Commander. So there was the people from our government saying, it's accurate, but we can't tell you how. It's just there. And that's not the only map. This one here is the Orontius Phineas map. It was made from a wood carving. It shows Antarctica without its ice cap. And this came from this book, which I just mentioned earlier when I quote about the languages. It's available from Amazon.com. You can get your own copy there. Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings by Charles Hapgood. Now I want to talk about out-of-place artifacts, also known as OOP-arts. Out-of-place artifacts. This is what's called an Olmec head. Olmec heads are found in Central America and Eastern Mexico. They're carved from basalt, lava, and they're believed to be about 4,000 years old, as near as can be told. This one is in Santiago Tuxtla in Veracruz, Mexico. And from his book, Fingerprints of the Gods, Graham Hancock writes this. Here then was the first mystery of the Olmecs, a monumental piece of sculpture more than 2,000 years old, which portrayed a subject with unmistakable Negroid features. There were, of course, no African blacks in the New World 2,000 years ago. Well, according to his knowledge, right? According to common evolutionary knowledge. Nor did any arrive until the slave trade began well after the conquest. There is, however, firm paleoanthropological evidence that one of the many different migrations into the Americas during the last ice age did consist of people of Negroid stock. So there must have been some sort of, how are these people traversing the ocean? Fascinating. What is this thing? It is called Las Bolas Grandes. I'll let you translate that on your own if you know any Spanish. There are over 186 of them still in Costa Rica. Okay, they're just laying out there, just around. People find them. What's fascinating is that they are perfectly spherical to a variance of only plus or minus 0.2%. Big, huge stones. And they're just sitting out there. And nobody really knows why or who made them or what they're doing there. But the craftsmanship, that was made by some ancient Inca or Mayan? I think not. What about the Mayan calendar? You know, we're coming up pretty close on this December 12, 2012 thing. And you've heard all this whole Mayan calendar stuff and the end of the world and things. What was that? Okay, well, it's in the 12th month of the year 2012. Anyway, something like that. But our Gregorian calendar that we use calculates the exact length of a year at 365.2425 days. The actual length of a year is precisely 365.2422 days. This Mayan calendar, that's so ancient, predicted it at 365.2420 days. So ours is off by 3 thousandths. Theirs was only off by 2 1,000. So theirs is actually more accurate than our calendar is today. And the reason it took people so long to figure out what it was and how it worked is because it was all computed in base 20, mathematics. I can barely remember base 20. I mean, I have a hard time with base 2 when I'm looking at computer programs. And this is in base 20. So these guys weren't dummies. Why did they put so much care and detail and attention into these calendars? What significance was it to them? And how were they able to be so accurate and plot celestial movements so accurately? These were found. They thought they were just jugs until they started looking inside them, and then they realized, you know what? These are ancient batteries. This one was from a 2,000-year-old village near Baghdad. Reproduction using copper and iron cores have been used to electroplate metals. They can actually generate a sizable amount of current and can electroplate metals and jewelry with it. Here's an ancient hammer, what's left of it, found in London, Texas in June 1934. It was in a rock layer supposedly 500 million years old. Yet it looks exactly like a hammer. What's interesting about the hammer is not only the fact that it doesn't have any rust, the handle itself is partly petrified, but the composition. It's 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur. It's a very exotic blend, and it would take metallurgists quite a bit of working to get that composition to work. And yet here it is, with the handle partly intact, and the handle actually is partly coalified, which means it's been around for a little while. And then there's this interesting thing, which I don't suppose too many of you know about. It's called the Antikythera mechanism. In 1901, a Greek sponge diver, Elias Stadiatos, discovered a ship that was determined to have been sunk about 100 BC. One recovered artifact was a wooden box with a mass of corroded bronze. When the device was x-rayed years later, it was shown to be an elaborate analog computer. Analog computer. So they started working on it. They took it all apart. They were able to figure it out here. And this is kind of a sideways view of what it would look like. The sun gear has 64 teeth. It meshes with the smaller of a 38-48 gear pair. The 48 meshes with the smaller of a 24-127 gear pair. The 127 meshes with the 32 teeth of the moon gear. The ratio of angular speeds can then be calculated as, and you take these numbers, 64 over 38 times 48 over 24, and you come out with this number here, 13.36842, which is an excellent approximation of the astronomical ratio, 13.368267. And this is all, just looking at those dials would give me a headache. I'd get a migraine. And yet these people made this calculation. So as you turn the handle, it would move all these dials and move pointers, And not only could it compute the movements of the sun and moon, but many of these people who have studied this believe it was capable of tracking the movements of several major planets as well. And ancient mariners, at least one of them, had this on his ship. Well, if you're going to go out and you're going to map things, you've got to have some sort of navigation device, right? There you are. I found out about this from this book. Jeff Winter and I found this many, many years ago. We were downtown Portland at some bookstore, and I found a copy of it down there. I've since found several of them at Goodwill stores for like $1. It was Feats and Wisdom of the Ancients. It's a Time Life book. But I would recommend, if you want to write this down, it's a great resource I found, abebooks.com. It's kind of like Amazon, but independent booksellers can list their inventories on there all across America and even in Europe. And you can, if the title of it exists and somebody's got it for sale, you type it in the title of the book and they'll say, yeah, I've got a copy for sale here, and I'll ship it to you and postage and stuff. And so you want to find some rare books that you can't find are out of print, this is where you go. All right, here's that reality check we talked about. If evolution were true, the human race has evolved up from an ape-like ancestor. Mankind is progressively becoming more advanced. And therefore, mankind has no need of a savior, if evolution were true. And there should be no evidence to the contrary for this hypothesis. But we've just discovered evidence to the contrary to this hypothesis, which means that we can conclude that the hypothesis is false. That's an interesting theory, but does it agree with reality? No. Anybody want to counter that? I wouldn't think so. Now, if the Bible is true, then mankind was made perfect in God's image. Mankind inherited a sinful nature as a result of Adam's fall. The ancient world was deluged by a global flood because of man's wickedness, and our adversary, the devil, is trying to destroy mankind because we are made in the likeness of God, who he hates. And we have hope for the future because Jesus is coming soon to grant eternal life to all those who love him. And that starts with us coming to his word and believing his word and falling in love with Jesus because he wants to reveal himself to us.